Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for actionable strategies to support students' social and emotional behavior skills. Today's webinar is brought to you by EdWeb and Illuminate Education, who is provider of the FastBridge assessment system. I'm Emily Sumner, and I'm going to be your host today. Again, we appreciate everyone joining us during such a busy time. And I want to thank each of you for the extraordinary work you've been doing to get ready for back to school. Your students have been dealing with months of stress, grief, disruption of learning, and the many uncertainties that are with us as we head into this school year. And all of this is going to impact their behavior and their ability to learn. And I know all of you are concerned about that. So in just a few minutes, we're going to be talking about specific strategies to build students' social, emotional, and behavioral skills. And these skills are so essential to helping students cope with all that's been going on and helping them to be prepared to learn. So I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Gregory Fabiano to join me on screen. Dr. Fabiano is a professor of psychology at Florida International University and a licensed psychologist. His work focuses on evidence-based assessments and treatments for children with ADHD. He is currently associate editor for School Mental Health and is author or co-author of over 100 peer-reviewed publications and book chapters. He's also written 2 books on effective school-based interventions. We are really excited to have Dr. Fabiano here with us today to share some insights and strategies on how to support our students' social, emotional, and behavioral well-being during these difficult times. So I will go ahead and turn things over to him.
Great. Thank you for that nice introduction. Glad to be here. When we're talking today, I really think districts have spent a lot of time figuring out the number one concern for students and educators: safety. Right? We can't have any further discussions if we can't guarantee that we've done our due diligence to promote an environment that's going to be as safe as we can reasonably expect it to be. Then the next step is, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, we have to have wellness present. Students have to be in a secure, predictable environment that will enable them to be able to learn. And then the last step after that is student learning, and that student learning is going to be dependent on those first 2 things being handled appropriately. And so glad to see so many people here today to talk about this. And I guess the one other thing I want to say at the front end of this talk is that we're all in this together, and we're all in this together for the first time. So I think one of the great things about working with educators is that they're always innovating. And I expect if we look back in a month or 2, there will be people in educational communities that have come up with really great strategies and ideas that are going to add to and enhance and maybe even lead to some better outcomes than the things we talk about today. And I hope people will share that with one another as we go forward. Just a quick advanced organizer. We're going to provide an overview of what Tier 1 or universal interventions and supports for social and emotional behavior will look like. We're going to talk about how to set up a class-wide contingency management approach. We're going to talk about best practice strategies that are involved with these approaches. I have a couple of case studies I'd like to share that people in the field tried out and put together and reported back some successes. We'll talk a little bit about how to progress monitor interventions that you try. An important thing to always think about when we think about maintenance and sustainability of gains is how do we make sure that we are constantly not only monitoring how things are going, but using those data to course correct if needed. And then we'll talk a little bit about troubleshooting at the end. So when we talk about Tier 1, something that's important to acknowledge is that we're talking about all students in the class. So these are universal interventions. So, Tier 1 interventions, if we're thinking about a school building, apply to all students that are in the school building. If we're talking about a classroom, it's all students in that classroom. If we're talking about a small work group, then it would be for all students in that work group. We know that there are going to be children in any group that are going to need more than what the universal intervention provides. Our hope is that the universal strategy captures about 80% of students in a class. So if we have a class of 20, hopefully it captures and supports appropriately about 16 of those students. We know that a handful of students might need some more supportive interventions because they're at risk in some way or another. Maybe they're fragile learners. Maybe they have, there's the kind of those kids that are tweeners that they'll follow the rules sometimes, but not always. and we are going to have to do some tier 2 interventions to help support those kids. And then there's always going to be a group of kids that need more intensive, sustained, chronic supports. And these might be children with mental health concerns. They might be children with learning disabilities. And if we do a good job at the universal level, that's going to leave us a lot more time and resources to help the kids that need more. And that's the most equitable way to think about distributing resources when we think about social emotional supports, is that we capture as many as we can with the whole class approach, but then we leave as much as is needed to support the kids that need more, so that everybody's getting what they need and ultimately being put in a position where they can learn and evolve and develop. Here's just some examples of the sorts of targets we might think about for Tier 1. So there's really two things to think about as an educator, and I know you do this implicitly in your work. On the one hand, you're always thinking about how do we build skills? How do we help students grow, evolve, create more competencies? And then the other thing we're always thinking about doing is how do we reduce impairment or problems if they're present? What are the sorts of mechanisms we have to put in place to help children exhibit better self-control or think before acting? How do we help them to focus and attend for longer periods of time than maybe they are able to at the present time? And our Tier 1 interventions that we're going to talk about for the rest of the time today are typically focused on improving and building one of these areas of competency or adaptation, or reducing impairment, or both. And it's really going to be up to the educator to think about what are the things that they find are proximally concerning to them that they might want to really focus on using some of these skills or strategies to support the students in their class. If we are to think of a different kind of pyramid, like how much of the strategies should we be using at any particular time, it's critical to emphasize that the foundation of everything we do is a strong, positive, caring relationship with your student. That's not something that you learn about by reading a book or a manual. That's really why you got into the field in the first place, right? You care about the student's perspective. You're a good listener. When they say something, your ears perk up and you're trying to really hear what they're saying. What's coming? Why are they stating these facts or the sentence to me? What's behind this? You're encouraging them. You acknowledge progress, even if it's not at the finish line, but you know that they're on their way to the finish line. You're supporting their persistence or their effort. And then just good, engaging teaching. It's hard to misbehave if I'm having fun in my classroom and I enjoy seeing my teacher smile at me or give me an attaboy or an attagirl for something that just happened. That sort of foundation is critical. And although we'll talk about specific strategies, it's in my mind, I'm always thinking this is what's happening all the time in concert with these strategies. Then, if we build upon things here, praise and encouragement is going to be part of Tier 1 strategies. And also rewards and celebrations. One of the real shames of the spring when all schools went to remote instruction is that children missed out on a lot of those rewards and celebrations that are interwoven into the fabric of schools. And I'm not only talking about birthdays, but I'm talking about the good feeling of seeing up on the teacher's marking board that I turned in my homework every day this week, and I got to put the pin saying that I was an academic ace in this class, or whatever else it might be. We also know that, as we'll talk about, limits, rules, and consistent follow-through is part of Tier 1. And then the things at the top really shouldn't be happening very often if these things below are working really well. So there's always going to be a time when a teacher is going to have to give corrective feedback to a student. They might have to plan to ignore particular behaviors that maybe are mildly annoying. And then other consequences like office referrals or parent conferencing, if those things are happening frequently, that's a canary in the coal mine that's signaling that these things are probably not working as well as they should be, because if they are, we see very little of these things. They're really just procedures that are in place but don't have to be implemented often because there's no reason for the child to misbehave and try to get attention other ways. They've gotten them through the skilled educators approach that's represented down below here. So let's talk about a couple of specific strategies. We have a number of attendees on the call today, and I imagine if we were to really go down the list, we would hear almost as many different versions of the way education is working in their particular school or district. And so I'm going to talk using broad strokes. I'm going to really challenge the attendees today to think about, well, how might I use this tool that I know about and tailor it to my particular class and situation? So, as we talked about at the beginning, we have to make sure that the students are feel safe, secure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But there's really no replacement for strong curricula, and that's one of the things I think when educators and parents did some Monday morning quarterbacking and looked with 2020 hindsight and over the summer of what happened in the spring is that because there was such an abrupt transition, it was very hard to come up with consistent curricula across all those weeks. I think a lot of people kept hoping it was going to be over and we wouldn't have to do this anymore, and then it just kept persisting. So one of the real challenges for this year is knowing that there's a little bit of burnout in the rearview mirror for the children and the parents if there's remote or hybrid instruction. It's really re-engaging with the passion you had as an educator when you started in the field and figuring out how to be engaging, fun, interactive, and use some of these technological tools that do allow us to do remote instruction, perhaps in new ways or in ways that mimic some of the things that really work in a whole class setting. So just for an example, some of the online portals for large class meetings allow for breakout rooms. That might be a way to help students work together and it would break up some of the lecturing or just looking at the screen. It gives them an opportunity to do some of the things that they really enjoy doing when they're in an in-class setting if they happen to be on remote instruction. You could also arrange for team projects that students would have to connect and figure out how to do outside of any of the formal class lectures or meetings. And that might be a way to think about varying the type of engagement that students have with your whole class. It's also the case that in any kind of learning situation, the adult is usually providing corrective feedback if something's not quite right or the student needs some additional support. But they should also be catching the kid being good, noting when they do things the right way. Because anytime anybody's learning a new skill, it's rarely that it happens right away. Most of the times, the new skill develops in small steps. Reflect back on anybody with the call who has a child. When they were learning to walk, you didn't stand with your arms crossed at the other end of the room and wait until they walked fluidly all the way from the coffee table they pulled themselves up on over to you. And then you said, "Good job. I'm really proud of you. Now you're a walker." Right? You got excited when they pulled themselves up on the edge of the coffee table. You got excited when they scooted along. You showed that you're excited by a lot of attention, a lot of encouragement. As they took their first couple wobbly steps, you might start clapping and get very excited. Well, that same approach was always embedded in classrooms as students were learning phonemic awareness, as students were learning how to add or subtract. Teachers were doing that kind of routinely. Now, if we reflect on what a remote instruction approach is like, it's a little more challenging to do that because an educator has divided attention. They're looking at a number of squares, a number of different environments. Might be harder to interact with students fluently because they're on mute or they're not on mute, that sort of thing. So when we think about this same principle in a remote instruction environment, I would think about maybe starting to try to incorporate some more personal communications, either through a text or an email, as much as is possible. If you notice something that was good, reaching out. And something I guess that might be a theme underlying all of these suggestions or strategies is that the caregivers are our allies in a remote instruction environment. And what we have to be very careful about is we don't know what the home situation is like for any particular caregiver. The only thing we know is that every situation is different. And it may be easy for a caregiver to get burned out if they're just having trouble logging on. They forgot their password for the school-based portal, or they might not understand how to do the particular assignment that the children were given. It's been a long time since they've been in school. And so sharing some successes that the child has achieved with the caregiver may go a long way in helping them keep the momentum, as we know that this is going to be some time that we're going to be in this uneasy situation that we could be shifting rapidly between both remote and in in-class instruction. Something else that I'm always humbled when I go in and observe classrooms and get a chance to see is that educators implement academic response opportunities every chance they can get. They're naturals at this, right? They're trying to get children to apply the material they learned in new situations, extend what they have already shown that they know how to do to a new interaction or a new assignment. And academic response opportunities in classrooms often work quite well because you have the whole class in front of you. You can be walking around, calling on students randomly to answer. If a student is in a remote instruction environment, I think we have to think a little more carefully about this, that it's easy to hide yourself as a student, right? In fact, a lot of the parents that we talked to over the summer said that their child would just turn off their camera, or they'd turn the monitor to the side so they weren't on the camera anymore, and then they could disengage and they wouldn't have to pay as much of attention. I think one of the things that we want to think really carefully about in both always in class and in hybrid and in remote situations is to be having the children doing a lot of the talking, because that helps me as the educator know through my own formative assessments whether or not they're really understanding or grasping the concepts that we're talking about. The other thing that might be important to think about this year in terms of instruction are what's called major concept summaries. So at the outset, there was some mention about the COVID-19 slide. There's always been this knowledge of the summer slide between the end of June and then the beginning of the next school year. If you look at students' achievement, there's sometimes a step back because they're not getting the reps that they get all throughout the whole school year of practicing these academic concepts and reading lots of words. And if they're out in their backyard all summer, or they're not spending a lot of time reading or practicing their math facts, they become less fluent, and that can impact their academics. Well, if we reflect on all the children coming back to school this fall, a concern is that there's been a lot of variability in the academic reps that have been available between the middle of March and then heading towards September. And there may have been some children that got just as many reps as they would have gotten had they been in class from March until June. We also know that there are some children, some through no fault of their own, either because of lack of technology or connectivity issues, or there wasn't a caregiver who could be available to support them in their learning, that they may not have gotten the reps that they needed. And so the gap between the students who are returning in terms of what they know and what they're able to convey may be larger than what we would typically see given a typical school year. And so I think it's on all educators to remind themselves that we have to continuously summarize key points, skills, or concepts. And I might even have to do that in a way that seems a little overboard, because I'm trying to make sure whoever is the farthest behind in terms of their knowledge or fluency with these concepts gets it and starts to integrate it into the scaffold that they have in their mind of what they're supposed to do. This might be particularly important in a remote instruction situation. It's going to include repeating concepts frequently, or asking the children to repeat back what the key concept or the key point was. Checking for understanding. If you think about what a law professor might do, they would just randomly call on one person. Greg, what was the main point of what we just said? Then all students have to be paying attention, because they never know when that question is going to be directed to them. And then the other thing, again, teachers do this naturally. I don't want to belabor this point, but looking for gaps in completed work is going to be a way that you can do some formative assessment to know if there's a area of the content that needs more remediation or needs some more discussion. Perhaps we're going to get into the part here where these are the tomorrow strategies, things that teachers can do tomorrow. One of the great things about being a child, and really even being an adolescent, and even an early adolescent, is that the adults take most of the heat off you in worrying about everyday things. In fact, we know one of the signals of normative child development is really an ignorance of a lot of the tough things that can go on in the world. And in fact, children who have been subjected to trauma or who have had difficult situations they've had to manage, we know that that's one of the difficulties with them, is that their cognitive development has a hard time understanding what's going on. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a stress that has touched everybody. It would be impossible to shield children from the stress or the anxiety that's just present in our entire world. And so, one of the ways that we can really help children cope is to provide some more predictability in their daily life. They're coming from 6 months of unpredictability, right? Nobody knew what was going to happen next. Uh, Educators, through clear structure, clear routines, and directly explained rules, can help again provide some of that stability in children's lives. And a direct effect of that should be to reduce anxiety, because now children, if they know what to expect and what they have to do, and that the adults are in charge and taking care of things, that's a nice place to be as a child. If things are unclear and they keep changing, and it's frustrating or irritating, and then I look to my parent and even they don't know what to do, that's a tough place to be for a kid. So one of the real important things to think about is what schedule is going to be run for the upcoming school year, and understand that it might need to be agile, it might need to be flexible, but that schedule is going to be one that we run for the whole school year. That means starting and ending on time. It means providing an advanced organizer. You might include some standard procedures at the beginning and end of every class lesson that you do, both in person and online, so that you're linking those two things together. That becomes predictable. That's going to help kids habituate back into the typical school schedule. One of my main concerns, something that I work with a lot of kids with challenging behaviors, and I always think of them as having a deficit in terms of the nice things said to them, right? That they're always corrected. Don't do that, put that down, get away, stop that, knock it off. And they don't get a lot of, I'm proud of how responsible you just were. That was a really nice example of cooperation that I just saw. Those kinds of things don't happen as much for kids with challenging behaviors because they get corrected a lot. I think we can now generalize that to a wider range of kids that may not have been getting positive attention for things, and may have actually been in stressful situations in a small home living situation with other siblings and parents who've been stressed because of work situations or changes in their own lives. And so catching kids being good, acknowledging appropriate behavior, balancing that across all the students in your class is really important. And I also note down here again, copy the caregiver. If you can let them know that you notice something nice about your child or their child, that's going to be an important thing going forward. I'm going to skip a little bit over these examples of effective and ineffective requests, but what I would like to say is that this is a year that teachers that have clear routines, have clear rules, and have clear expectations, they're ahead of the game, because that's going to allow them to shift agilely from different learning modalities if necessary. It's going to help the child know what they need to do and allow them to comply. And it's also going to help the parent know what needs to be done, because the worst position in the world for a parent is to be relying on your child for accurate information. Children often are amongst our poorest of reporters on what's true. That's especially true if it relates to a academic demanding task. They sometimes seem to shift their point of view towards, oh, we don't have to do that, or that's optional. The clearer the phrasing and the more direct in the phrasing, the better off the kids are going to be. So issue assignments in manageable steps, break them down. If it's online or remote, something that's going to be really important is to perhaps have written instructions and put yourself in the shoes of the parent or caregiver or the child who may not be as knowledgeable about an online environment and might get stuck at the login page and not even get to the really good lesson planning that was embedded in the assignments or the lectures that they were supposed to watch. And would also suggest using similar instructions across the week and across the modalities that you're in. Something else that I think is important for all of us to acknowledge is that this is not an easy time for anybody. It's certainly not an easy time for educators. I'm humbled to look and see the educators working hard to make the environment safe for the kids, and they have lots of concern about the kids, and many are putting their feelings about the children that they're teaching, about their own concerns and their own worries. And I think we can predict that the return to school is going to be rocky to some degree for some kids as they get used to these rules and structures and routines again. And so planned ignoring is a good strategy to use in this situation. This is a case where educator chooses their battles. Certainly, you wouldn't allow a child to be disrespectful to you. Children shouldn't be swearing in school. They shouldn't be aggressive. But if a child does some mild complaining or maybe some fidgeting, or they're doing something that's irritating, but it's not really something we would make a federal case over, and they're doing the work or participating otherwise, planned ignoring can be a good strategy for that, and just continue to compliment or notice or acknowledge the good things that they're doing. And if it's something that is annoying you and another child in class isn't doing it, you can differentially acknowledge them for doing this thing that you like. The last thing I would think about embedding into all lessons this year, again, because children's attention stamina might not be as strong as it was given the long layoff from really formal school settings. PreMed contingencies are a good example of something you can do. PreMed contingencies put a less preferable activity before a more preferable activity. When you clean your room, then you can go outside. When you eat your vegetables, then you can have dessert. When you clean up this toy, then you can take another one off the shelf. PreMed contingencies might be useful when we think about our lessons that we're teaching students across different grade levels, really K through 12, where we can let children know when we finish this, then we can do a group game, or when we're finished with this lecture, then you can be put in a breakout room and you can have some time to talk to your classmates. That sort of thing might help kids stay on task because they know there's something good coming after the activity that might be more academically or attention demanding, and it puts things in the right order, right? The PreMed contingencies are why we don't get paid on Monday. We get paid on Friday after we put in our work week. So I'm going to talk just briefly about class-wide positive behavioral support approach. When I think about a behavior, the B in the middle, I really think about these ABCs. The B's in the middle. The A is the antecedent. So that's something that would come before a behavior that we were to see. It could be a positive behavior or it could be a negative behavior. And then every behavior is followed by a consequence. So here, the example below, a child might start to think, I want those kids in the back to pay attention to me. They have a thought, that's the antecedent. They mouth off to the teacher, that's their behavior. And then the consequence of that might be a teacher reprimand, right? They might get in trouble for doing that, but the other children laugh. And if that was what the child was really trying to get, we can predict that that consequence is going to lead to an antecedent in the future of, now I know I can get peer attention this way. So I might make more of these inappropriate remarks and I'll get more of this peer attention I desire. We can also use this model to think about positive behaviors, right? If I give a really clear instruction, I'm most likely to get compliance. And then I can say, thanks everybody for being ready to learn. We can now start with our lesson. That's a more positive consequence than me having to say, hey, how come you're not ready? Let's go put all of your materials away so we can start. If we were to use these thoughts about setting up a class-wide positive behavioral support, we would identify a class-wide goal. So if it's an individual goal, like there's only one or two kids that are doing something that I want changed, those are kids that we talked about that are going to be tier 2 or potentially tier 3. But if we have a class-wide goal, and as I think about the return to school, some class-wide goals might be helping kids get used to maintaining their physical distance, right? Staying in their marked off areas within the classroom. I actually don't have, I'm interested to see what happens with the mask wearing in schools, but I don't have strong concerns about children being able to rise to the challenge of doing that. After all, it was only 10 years ago that educators helped our whole country learn how to sneeze into their elbow. For those of you that were around during the H1N1 flu pandemic, that was something that was taught. Before that, everybody sneezed into an open hand, which it turns out is really a bad strategy. I think that children will look at their role models in the school and they'll follow what their role models are doing, which is wearing the masks. Now we know from lots and lots of years of working in schools that sometimes children have trouble staying where they're supposed to be staying in a classroom, and so that might be a reasonable class-wide goal to start, is to help kids maintain their physical distance. But it could be other things. It could be interruptions. It could be participating in a lesson. It could be staying on task. But you have to define the goal in behavioral terms. Then promote antecedent control. That means explaining what the scenario is to the kids. Here's what our target behavior is. This is what it would look like if you're doing it the right way. This is what it would look like if you're not doing it the right way. Might be telling them about what kind of consequences they could earn. And then promote consequence control. Something good should happen if kids are following the rules, and there should be some consequence, which doesn't have to be a negative. It just might be missing out on the extra positive thing if they don't meet the goals. And then go ahead and explain how this would work to the class. Again, these are implemented for all students, the same procedures used by the teacher each day. You're really trying to prevent the behavior problems from occurring to begin with. And this gives you a tool to use on an ongoing fashion that's consistent, so that you're telling the kids ahead of time how this is going to work is a much better strategy than trying to correct or reprimand or demand once the behavior has already happened, right? At that point, you're on the low ground because the kid has already done the thing and now you're just reacting. If you can be on the high ground and tell them, here's what I expect, I'm an optimist about kids. I've rarely, if ever, met a kid in my whole career that showed up and said, I want to fail in this situation. They always show up wanting to succeed. Sometimes things deviate them from that goal. So one example of a class-wide positive behavioral approach, there's lots of them. If anybody wants to email or follow up after this, I'd be happy to share some of these other examples. But we're going to talk about the good behavior game and think about how that might be used in an on-ground, a hybrid, or remote learning situation. In this approach, you target specific behaviors as we talked about. You divide the class up into teams. You might say, we have this part of the room are the bears, this part of the room are the cheetahs, this part of the room are the blue jays, and your team is working together to have no more than 3 reminders for being out of your assigned area. And then during the lesson or during the time the teacher's working with the children, they would be going on with their standard procedures. But if someone got out of their area, they'd have to say, okay, Blue Jays have 1 time of being out of their area. Remember, you can only have 2 more times where that happens. If the class is successful, then all kids on that team earn the reward. If your team had more than 3, then your team wouldn't earn the little reward. I'm going to show you a brief video to just convey that these rewards don't have to be expensive things teachers buy. They can be simple. You're going to see a teacher that had set up the good behavior game in his classroom. He had you'll see some kids off to the side who aren't allowed to participate in the reward, and then some kids that are very enthusiastically participating in the reward, which is only about 10 seconds long.
A prize from Granny's Wacky Prize Box. Today's prize?
Drum solos. This is your moment to rock. 12 seconds. Here we go.
The research shows very clearly that those kids that were exposed to the game in 1st and 2nd grades were less likely to be involved in aggressive and risky behaviors later in life, and also less likely to use tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs.
What 2 letters did she use, ladies and gentlemen?
It's helped organize the class, it's helped with teamwork, it's helped with collaboration, and those aren't just skills that they're going to need now, but those are skills they'll take with them in the future.
So as you can see, part of being in school is reward is something you get to do, and sometimes one of the things that is exciting about the reward is that we work together as a group to earn this. And you could see the smiles on those children's faces as they were rocking out their drum solos. Very simple reward that they could work for. It didn't cost a nickel, but something that children were excited to earn. And we'll talk about how this could be developmentally extended. We might have some high school or middle school teachers on the call today, how it could be extended upwards for those grade levels. Group contingencies work just as well at those levels, sometimes a little bit even better because peer attention is so important for that developmental age that it can be used effectively there as well. One of the upward extensions for older grade levels would be to think about, well, what's really important to kids who are preteens or teens? And one of the things they really like to do is socialize with one another. Sometimes they like to just do nothing. So ending class a little bit early or giving some free time at the end might be a reasonable reward from an educator's perspective if that meant they got in 35 really solid minutes of instruction, as opposed to 35 minutes of instruction that was interspersed with a lot of redirection or having to stop or regroup or correct children or teens that were interrupting their lesson. So I'm going to show you, just in the interest of showing what some people with their boots on the ground in the field have done, I'm going to show 3 case studies of group contingencies, one at an early elementary school level, one at an elementary school level, and then one at a high school level. This was a pretty unique study that instead of tattling, they called it tootling, which was having students come up to the teacher to tell them something nice their classmates have done. Again, if we're running a deficit of positives in the world right now, this is a great example of how to ramp up the nice things that are being said and that are going on in the classroom environment. The teacher in this study used Class Dojo to track the toodles and post them to students, and then there was a goal that students had to meet, having a certain number of these happen across the day. So again, thinking about little kids, you might say, well, they're just going to do a whole bunch of them right at the beginning and then and try to get it over with to get the reward. But remember, little kids are pretty honest with their behavior. They're going to forget about this. They might have to see their classmates do it 1 or 2 times before they activate themselves to go do it. But what you're really doing is creating a crescendo of nice things being said about one another, which not only is a positive for the class, but it wipes out the tattling because they don't need to go to the teacher to get attention, one-on-one attention by waiting for their classmate to mess up so they can tell the teacher. Now they can look around at all the good things going on and go up to their teacher and get that one-on-one adult attention by saying something nice about their classmates. It changes the whole climate of the classroom situation almost overnight. And you can see it's a little hard to see some of these graphs, but basically, if you look at children's behavior, you see in classroom 1, you see a baseline, kind of middling effect. You see real nice separation during the intervention. The intervention flip-flops in terms of the positive and negative behavior when they withdrew it, and then it returns to where you would want it to be following the reinstatement of the intervention. And they showed that this worked not only in one classroom, but actually in 2 others. And this is a very strong design to show that this simple intervention had a very strong effect on the social behavior of the students in the classroom. I'll show you another study that we did on our own team. I don't know how many of you spend a lot of time in grade school cafeterias. They're going to be much different this year, but they're typically amongst the most challenging environments in the entire school building because you have a lot of children with low adult supervision and a lot of downtime that's not productive, right? If a child has a 40-minute cafeteria period and they eat their lunch within 10 minutes, that's 30 minutes of kind of letting their mind go wild on what else they can do in this time when there's not a lot of adults telling me what I'm supposed to be doing. In fact, we found when we looked at an average rule violation rate in the first week we were in this cafeteria as K through 5 students, they averaged 300 rule violations a day. And these are things like not only talking back or being disrespectful or teasing other kids, but sliding around under the table and the piles of trash that they created. It meant running around, some dangerous behavior where kids could knock into somebody or something because they weren't looking. We set up a pretty simple group contingency. This is a nice technique that we were advised to use, was to make random scans about whether the class was following rules or not. So one of the things educators often tell me is it's really hard to keep up with all these programs, and I can't watch all the kids at the same time. You don't have to. If you make a random scan, you tell the kids 3 times in the next 30-minute period, I'm going to be looking, and if everybody's following the rules, you earn a point or you earn a ticket. Or if I look up and somebody isn't following the rules, so somebody's out of their area that they were supposed to be in, I'll just announce that the class didn't earn their point for this scan. And you do that randomly. That's a pretty efficient model. And then at the end, each scan, if the children in the cafeteria at their lunch table were all following the rules, they earned a ticket. And then those tickets went into a bin at the end of the lunch period. And the next day on the morning announcements, the principal pulled out 3 classrooms tickets, and those kids earned a group prize. They could wear pajamas to school. They could earn extra free time. I'm really hoping with the remote instruction, I'm going to find out about the most creative rewards this year from teachers, because they can capitalize on the chance that kids are in their own home. It's going to be easy to do. You earn the chance to wear a funny hat on our next online class call, or you could wear your pajamas to school today, based on it being a reward, not just because you just got up and out of bed and joined us. Once we started this group contingency, you can see almost an immediate drop to half as many rule violations. And then something I think is nice, that conveys something nice about schools, is that when we brought this to the problem-solving team in the school, they said, boy, that's great, but I think we can do even better. We're going to keep track of which classes are the most successful in following the rules, and they're going to get a banner at the end of the week if they're in the top 3 over their door, and the principal and the custodial staff and the specials teachers are all going to make a point to go to that room and congratulate the class on being so well behaved in the cafeteria. And you can see that got us an even bigger bump down that sustained for more of the school year. The last thing I want to talk about is how we might do this with high school students. So a lot of people say, well, yeah, those group contingencies are great, but how do I do them with older students? This was a really nice study that illustrated how that could easily be done. The teacher in this study set a 2-minute countdown timer at the beginning of class. If the timer reached 0 before a teen in the class did something negative, like interrupted or talked back, the class earned a point and the timer was reset. If a negative behavior happened, let's say even if it happened at the 10-second mark on the countdown, it would get reset to 2 minutes. And the class had to earn 17 points across the class period. 35-minute class period, they had to earn most of the points, or 40-minute class period, they had to earn most of the points, and they could earn free time at the end of the class. And you can see some pretty striking results here. This is intervals without negative behavior. You can see there was not many in any of these 3 classes that participated. As soon as the contingency was set, look what happened. The teenagers immediately towed the line and did exactly what they were supposed to do because they were motivated by that free time at the end. When the contingency was taken away, they went back to some goofing around and not following the rules. But when reinstated, they immediately returned perfectly to hitting their 17 interval mark. So here's a group contingency. The group contingencies are getting the peers to do the work of the educator for you, right? They stop laughing and snickering when there's misbehavior, and they start saying, shh, stop, pay attention, and help reverse that maintainer of negative behavior. So I'm mindful of the time, so I just want to mention a couple more things, and then we'll have some time for questions. I do think something that's really important to emphasize for this upcoming school year is the importance of screening. There's a concern that we're, to some degree, in the dark about where our students are in terms of their social, emotional, and academic behavior. And an initial screening in the fall to really get a temperature check of where the students in the class are is going to be critical. And let's be honest, it may be not necessarily be the students who we might have thought about in March as needing extra supports or services or interventions. It might be different students that are returning in the fall because of all the different reasons why they may have been impacted in a negative way in the last 6 months. And the Sabres is a nice screening tool to be able to do that. If we're progress monitoring, that is trying to find out if a student or a classroom is responding to the intervention we implemented, direct behavior ratings are a great tool for doing that. They're simple and straightforward, and they only require 3 check marks. The teacher's just keeping track of a designated period of time and noting how often the student was or class was academically engaged, whether or not the student or class was respectful, and whether or not the student or class was disruptive. And it's a best practice assessment approach for being able to do that. One way, if we're thinking about class-wide programming that teachers can monitor progress, is to set some goals for themselves. Think about how many times you would be open to accepting some sideways behavior, some misbehavior, set a goal for making some improvement towards that, and then eventually, hopefully, you get to be like that high school class, which was having no negative behavior at all because the intervention worked so well. And as often is the case when you start these things, whatever you start out with may not be the secret sauce or have the correct components. So you try something out and then you do a little bit of reflection and think about what might I need to change. And you make small adjustments at a time until you come up with the right combination of interventions. And you might have the right combination of interventions and then you notice some backsliding. And so you have to go back to a troubleshooting approach like this and decide, well, what changed or what's different and what do I need to do differently to make this work more effectively? One of the things that I think is important to think about is this sort of solution where teachers are using data to inform their practice. Again, this year with all the question marks about what school's going to look like, not only in a month, but in 6 months, having data that informs practice is going to be absolutely critical because our impressions might change if we're not looking at the big picture to inform what we're planning to do. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Yes, we do have questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Fabiano. You covered a lot of information very quickly, but very effectively. So thank you for that. And just a reminder to folks, you will be getting a copy of or have access to the recording and the slide deck. So if you weren't able to write everything down quickly, you'll be able to review it and share it with your colleagues as well. Just quickly before we get to questions, I'd like to once again thank Illuminate Education, the provider of the Fast Bridge Assessment System, who brought Dr. Fabiano to you today. As you start to welcome students back to school and address the learning loss caused by COVID, the FastBridge system can help. This all-in-one system includes the most reliable measures for screening and progress monitoring students across math, reading, and the social and emotional and behavioral functioning in half the time of other systems. So it will provide invaluable data for you as you kick off the school year. Plus, it offers relevant data and research-based recommendations and coaching to guide effective decisions around instruction and intervention. So I encourage you to visit the FastBridge website at fastbridge.org, and you'll find more information. And you can also request a demo of the system. And Dr. Fabiano also mentioned some things about that, the screeners for SEB in his presentation. So let's go ahead and get to some of the questions that came in during the presentation. So we had someone write in that they're going to be teaching part of their class in person while other students are at home participating in live stream. Do you have any suggestions for using some of these activities when you're having to bridge both of those environments?
That's a great question, and I won't say that I have all the solutions to that, but I have some ideas. So to the extent to which you can unite the approach that you have, both for the in-person students and the remote learning students, that's going to be advantageous. If we think about contingencies, you could have a fun game that could be played both remotely and in person, flashcard bingo or guessing game or something like that, where you could be including students from both modalities at the same time in the reward. You could also think about target behaviors that would be appropriate for both modalities. So contributions or helpful behaviors if you're pairing up students, that sort of thing might be what you have to think to do. To be honest, though, I think also some of it's going to be trial and error. It's going to be figuring out what's the best way to maximize the learning environment in a way that's going to help students in both places. And then if you're carefully monitoring student progress, you're going to know if you see some positive changes, then you'll know that you're doing the right thing and you can persist in doing that.
Yeah, I think that trial and error is probably just a good rule of thumb for everything we're doing here in the next several weeks, especially as we get our feet wet with this new environment. So thank you. That was helpful. Do you have any suggestions for working with parents to help build these SEL skills? So collaborating with parents to reinforce what you might be doing in the school environment?
Great question. The parents are really our allies here and always have been, right? And when we do surveys, we ask parents what's important about our programming or services or school. The number one thing that always comes up, it has nothing to do with them and it has nothing to do about the environment or the way the programs or school happens. It always is my child's happiness, my child's social skills, my child's academics and learning, my child's friendships. They want what's best for their kid, and that always rises to the top, and it's the same right now. So they are allies. I think what might have to happen this year that's a little bit different than other years is a more active engagement with the parents about how they can help you help the child. And that might be providing some more specific tasks for parents to do. I think parents get overwhelmed if they see a whole weekly schedule of all the things that are due and a long list of different internet mediated modalities they got to log into or figure out. So if you can figure out, well, what's really important for the child, what can I ask the parent to assist or support, and then give them something that is easy to understand and convey, they're going to do it because they are just as concerned about the child as educators are. And I think maybe as we talked a little bit about opening up communication a little bit more to be more frequent about what's going well. If a child's not showing up for a meeting, a class meeting online, probably reaching out sooner rather than later to check in and acknowledge that that's happening. Being more active in that parent-teacher communication is going to be necessary to keep things on the right foot so that you can maintain the momentum you're going to need to throughout this school year. We can't burn out parents in September because this is going to be a long road and we need them all the way along that path.
Yeah, I think just as we had in our title of this webinar, just those sort of actionable, tangible things that you can give parents to do, I think will be most beneficial to them and help pull them through this challenging time right now. We had many of our attendees jump in to answer this question, but I thought I'd still pose it to you to just clarify what the grandma's rule is. You had that phrase up on a slide and then kind of talked about through some examples of that.
That's an old term. They probably should call it parents' rule because grandparents do anything, right? What it really it comes from, you eat your vegetables before you get dessert. That's the principle that underlines that. So in a classroom setting, once you finish this assignment, then you can do free reading, right? The assignment might be less preferable. Free reading is in a content area of the child's choice. They might be more interested in doing that. Teachers implicitly do this. When you clean up, then you can come outside to recess, right? When you wash your hands, then you can have lunch. You put the less preferable or more boring activity before the more preferable or interesting activity.
And I apply that rule to my own personal life. I make myself do the unfun thing first.
If you didn't, dishwashers would never get unloaded in the whole world.
Exactly. Clearly, my parents use that a lot with me, parents and teachers both. So let's see. This is an educator that actually works with adults in a prison, in a correctional educational setting. So just looking for some suggestions for rewards that might work both with adults and in that prison facility, because she can't give them anything. It would need to be things like that drum roll, but what might work with adults?
Yeah, so, what's rewarding to somebody varies based on the person. And the best person to ask is that individual. So if you're working with somebody or a whole class, I wouldn't go based on what I think is going to be rewarding for my class or that person. I might have some sense if I've watched their behavior or seen what they choose to do if given free rein. But really, the best source for rewards is the individual themselves who you're trying to motivate. And so the first thing I would do in a situation like that is have a conversation and say, hey, there's some things we have to get done. I'm happy if we meet our goal for the day, that you get to do something you want to do within the realm of possibility. Let's take a few moments to think about what might that be. What would be a motivator for you to make sure we get in 30 good minutes each day when we're meeting here together?
Yeah, and I think that applies to children too. Ask them what's going to be motivating to them, and then you can build that into your positive reward system. So we all like to have input in that way. So
They're
um,
readily willing to tell you what they like and what they
oh
want.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that helps build the ownership too, and that partnership that you have as a class, that we're all in this together, and I care about you and what you think, and achieving these goals together. So I think that is good tips for all of us in all areas of our life. So we are running out of time, unfortunately, but again, we appreciate everyone joining us today, most particularly Dr. Fabiano, to share all of these great suggestions. I certainly learned a lot and got motivated to put some of these actions or these strategies into action as we move forward into the school year. So thank you to Dr. Fabiano, and thank you again to Illuminate Education for bringing you here to be with us today. And again, we appreciate your joining us today. We wish you the best of luck in the coming school year, and appreciate all the hard work and dedication that you have to your students, to their families, and to the community as a whole. You're very much appreciated. So have a great afternoon, everyone, and we hope to see you back on a future Ed webinar.